everyone, and welcome to a weekly live stream session of the KLSCAH webinar series. My name is Yi and I'm your moderator for today's session. Today's webinar is about something that has been hovering over our heads and headlines in the past weeks: vaccines. With the first vaccines from Pfizer BioNTech soon to arrive end of next month, terms such as side effects and efficacy rates have been thrown around. There's certainly tension and uncertainty for many as to whether the arrival for the vaccines will be the answer to this COVID-19 pandemic. I am pleased to announce that today we have three very important guests with us who will answer the question of to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. For today's session, we have Azrul Muhammad Khalib, Chief Executive of Galen Health Center for Health and Social Policy, Dr. Kelvin Wuen, Member of Parliament for Bandar Kuching and Chairman of Parliamentary Select Committee for Health, Science and Innovation. And last but not least, Datuk Seri Dr. Dzulkefly bin Ahmad, former Minister of Health and currently Chair of Selangor Task Force for COVID-19. Before we begin, I would like to say a big thank you to our media partner for today's talk, the Malaysia Insight, our organizer, the KLSCAH Women Committee. You can also view this webinar session live as well on Dr. Kelvin and Dr. Seri, Dr. Dzulkefly's Facebook pages. And now I would like to invite our first panelist, Azrul, to share his views on the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines. Azrul, please go ahead.
Thank you, Yi, and thank you to the Kuala Lumpur Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss with you this issue, which you rightly pointed out, is not going to be going away anytime soon. And certainly when it comes to COVID, one of the most interesting things that has been developing over the past month or so has been the discussion about the arrival of vaccines to Malaysia. So I have a presentation that I'll be using for this discussion, and I'll just put it up. So one of the things that has been very much debated over the past couple of weeks at least is not just about the vaccine itself, but also the issue of vaccine hesitancy, basically a situation where people are much more reluctant to take up the vaccine, despite the fact that it is considered something that could help us in terms of not only in terms of preventing the spread of the disease, but also preventing from the possibility of serious complexities and serious disease as a result of infection. So let's just get down to it then, yeah? So we have, let me just show this, which is yesterday's update. Sorry, I didn't put up today's update, but yesterday the cases was 3,309, of which we can see very clearly in terms of the total number, we are now 158,434 as of yesterday. Now, when you look at it, we are basically in the third wave of the local epidemic, and we are regularly seeing new record in terms of daily numbers, and very much of this has been attributed to the activities in late December linked back to the holidays, the Christmas and New Year season. And one sobering fact here is that unlike the second wave, where we would have seen the peak of that wave by this point, we have not yet seen or know what the peak of the third wave is going to be. The positivity rate has been estimated at 8.2%, and the World Health Organization actually considers anything above 5 as being too high. So it's quite a sobering realization there that for Malaysia, we are considered an epidemic which is on the increase, and certainly in terms of measurement, we see the positive rate being more than 5. Of late, we've seen an increasing mortality amongst people who are infected. And one of the things that, for us at least at the Galen Center, what we are very interested in seeing is not only just in terms of the number of new cases, but also the demand on ICU beds due to serious illnesses, and definitely the number of deaths per day. Now, it's interesting here that there was a projection by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the IHME, which projected a peak of 5,000 daily cases in March. And it has been also estimated that we'll see 1,325 deaths by April the 1st. Now, we're not sure whether we'll see that large number of deaths by that time. I hope that we don't. But certainly when it comes to the number of daily cases, we're definitely approaching that number. And it's very likely that we might just hit that peak very soon, possibly in February. Now, where we are in terms of the epidemic in relation to the regional situation, you can see there that Malaysia is third on the list in comparison to all the other countries. It's quite sobering when you think about how Malaysia was among the better performing countries back in June, July, and now is considered one of the highest number of countries which have regularly reported 4-digit cases on a daily basis. And one thing we're very fortunate not to have is a high mortality. You can see that in terms of 578 cases compared to the thousands of deaths that you see in the neighboring countries. But when we entered this epidemic back in early 2020, January or so, Malaysia was actually ranked one of the best countries in this region. In fact, higher than Singapore in terms of preparedness for major infectious disease outbreaks. And this was determined by the Global Health Security Index of the Economic Intelligence Unit. So we have heard quite a bit from the government concerning the incoming vaccines that have been procured by the government. We've first heard one, which was the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is an mRNA vaccine. And later on, we were alerted to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is an adenovirus vector vaccine. And also in terms of the COVAX initiative, where Malaysia will procure a certain percentage of its vaccines from this global initiative, but most likely also AstraZeneca. And the most recent discussion right now is concerning the possibility or very likelihood of Chinese developed vaccines on Malaysian soil, which is the Sinovac vaccine. So it's great to hear that vaccines are coming in, but the question really now becomes as to whether or not there will be an uptake. It's one thing to be able to get the supply of vaccines into the country. It's another thing to be able to roll out and vaccinate people with this vaccine. And today we're actually seeing problems of vaccine hesitancy. Now, one of the main problems that we see here is that patients may be hesitant to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. And when we say the COVID-19 vaccine, it could refer to any of the vaccines that I mentioned briefly just now. So how do we see this? Now, Ipsos did a survey back in September 2020. Seems like a lifetime ago. So 85% of Malaysians who were surveyed were confident that they would get themselves vaccinated. The Ministry of Health just concluded an online survey a week or so ago, and it found that 67% of Malaysians were willing to be vaccinated and 33% were unsure or rejected. Is this indicative of an increasing vaccine hesitancy amongst the general population? It seems to imply that. And there could be a number of factors as to why this is happening. And one of the reasons is really linked back to these factors, these questions that, let me guess, some of you have thought about your grandma, your father, your mom, your aunt, over the family table, all asking, are you going to get the vaccine? If it comes into the country, are you going to get vaccinated? Which vaccine? The main question that people seem to be asking are there going to be any side effects? Am I going to be an X-Men after taking the mRNA vaccine, get a mutant strain or become something that you're not? Is this a genetically modified organism? Do they work? Are they safe? And one of the challenges that's starting to come up is which country are they from? Which uniquely the Chinese and Russian vaccine seems to be facing a certain amount of discrimination against, not really based on their technology, but really which country are they from? So these are some of the questions that patients have actually, people have actually raised concerning the possibility of a vaccine coming into the country. So they want to know, they want these questions answered, and they want the science to be the guiding factor. But there's been a lot of talk, there's a lot of misinformation. And here's the thing, these are all valid concerns, which in any public vaccine information campaign must be addressed. I'm not going to use my presentation to answer these questions for this evening. I'm basically wanting to highlight these questions to you so that we can have a discussion later on. But these are not nonsense questions. These are actually valid concerns, which even scientists, doctors, and very learned individuals in the medical fraternity also are having the same amount of hesitancy with regards to that. So let me just go on to that one then. Now, we assume that just because they're healthcare professionals, they're going to be able to take the vaccine and they're going to be able to promote the vaccine. But the reality here is that we find that even healthcare professionals themselves may be reluctant to, one, take the vaccine themselves, and two, to deliver or promote the vaccine. Now, there's no study at the moment that has looked into the attitudes of healthcare workers with regards to a potential COVID-19 vaccine. But if I may use the influenza vaccination as an example, where in 2016, there was a study that showed that more than half of Malaysian healthcare workers were vaccinated, more than half. But those who did not get themselves vaccinated were actually concerned about the safety of the vaccines. So this is an influenza shot. It's not even COVID. And there were also concerns among healthcare workers themselves concerning the safety of vaccines. So if you look at the questions that they're concerned about, the ones that actually influence them to make a decision whether or not to take a vaccine that is for COVID-19, they ask these questions. Does the technology work? Is there enough safety data regarding adverse events? Concern for expedited approval. And of course, the latest discussions right now concerning the variants B117 and B1351, variants that have been found in the UK and South Africa, respectively. These are questions that scientists and clinicians and many people who work in the medical field right now are having questions. So if you look in terms of what the layperson is asking, they're sort of similar but less technical to some of the questions that healthcare professionals are asking. But the change, the disruptive factor that COVID-19 has had on the healthcare environment is such that even they are asking these questions. Like, there's a lot of preference for inactivated inactivated vaccines, because that's considered a mature technology as opposed to the mRNA vaccine, which is considered quite a unique or novel technology, and it's going to be the first time that we use this in a vaccine. So there's a lot of questions concerning whether or not there's enough safety profile data that allows for clinicians to inform on adverse events that they can advise their patients. And we are slowly finding that out now as the rollout is happening in different countries around the world with millions of people being vaccinated. So it's important here to actually address these concerns of healthcare professionals, because at the end of the day, these people can positively influence vaccination decisions of peers, patients, friends, and family. So if you're wanting to ensure that you have a successful rollout of vaccine, especially in these very perilous times where people are very concerned about side effects and whether or not these things work, you really need to get the buy-in from healthcare professionals. And this cannot be said enough, and it cannot be taken for granted that we automatically would have the support. We must be able to address the issues, especially when it comes to the problems that seem to be arising concerning making people be assured of the safety of these vaccines. So let's see a little bit of the landscape of what the vaccine situation is like for what types of vaccines. Hopefully you can see this on your screen, but basically we have at least 6 different arrangements that seem to be either already been signed or in negotiations right now. The Prime Minister in his speech this afternoon indicated that basically the Malaysian government has already signed on to 3 deals that will provide vaccines for Malaysia. And this can be attributed to the agreement with Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and the COVAX initiative. So the other 3 are in various stages of discussion, including the one that was recently held at a press conference, announced that we would be producing, I think, Sinovac vaccines in Malaysia. So you can see the different types of technology there. You've got mRNA, you've got adenovirus vector, inactivated, and you can see here the different technologies that are involved. And for the first 2, it's considered arguably newer than the inactivated virus, which is a much more mature tech. So one of the things that needs to be assured to the Malaysian public and the people, the healthcare professionals here is that the questions that they are asking should really be able to be answered, assured, and signed off by an agency. And that agency in Malaysia is called the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency, or the NPRA, which is responsible for ensuring the safety, efficacy, and quality of pharmaceutical products through the registration and licensing in Malaysia. Now, before this, probably, unless you're working in the industry or in the health sector, you probably wouldn't know what NPRA is. But because of COVID-19 and vaccine coming in, NPRA must be the most famous government agency right now, because people want to know what NPRA's decision is going to be with regards to vaccines that are being proposed for Malaysia. Now, here's the good news. Our NPRA is considered one of the best regulatory agencies in the Asia region. And I have to stress this because there's been a lot of doubt, there's a lot of criticism, and there's a lot of questioning as to the credibility, but also the integrity of the processes involved in certifying these vaccines. You can be assured that the COVID-19 vaccines are being held to the same safety standards as all vaccines. And I will put my faith in the NPRA officers and the people over there working at the Ministry of Health to be able to do their job professionally and to be able to resist the need to expedite or take shortcuts or compromise upon the evaluation of these products. So if they are satisfied, then I'm satisfied. So that's just from my end. I will want to take any vaccine that has the NPRA sign off. So if you look at this particular highlight here, these are some of the questions that people have been asking concerning the efficacy of the different vaccines. You can see there 95% for the Pfizer, BioNTech, and then AstraZeneca between 60 to 90%. Also, because AstraZeneca also provides for COVAX, it's the same. But for the Sinovac one, they're still doing clinical phase 3. They're still doing phase 3 clinical trials, and the recent one from Brazil seemed to indicate more or less 50% efficacy, which is a little bit of a coin toss, really. You flip a coin and it heads or tails, and basically it either works or not. And I would like to think that we could have a little bit more in terms of the efficacy that we would want to use for a vaccine. So you can see the different stages and which ones that have been approved. So in terms of building vaccine confidence, what do we mean by vaccine confidence? Now, vaccine confidence is really the trust that patients, parents, providers, healthcare professionals have in the vaccines themselves, the people who administered vaccines, and the processes and policies that lead to the vaccine development, the licensing, the manufacturing recommendations for use. So today, the vaccination manufacturing process has more scrutiny than ever before. I think I've heard more podcasts that are discussing the vaccine manufacturing processes in a lifetime. I think I've heard so many that it's a learning experience, because many of these vaccines are also being put through an expedited process, which for a normal vaccine would take years, but in this case, it's taking advantage of new technologies, and it's able to do it at a much shorter period. So it's exciting for scientists to see this happening, and it's one of the things that we have to assure that in order for people to be able to use these vaccines, they have to have confidence in the vaccines. So if you look at the spectrum that I have on the screen there, it's not that easy. It's not a yes or no situation. You have outright refusal to people who are demanding to be vaccinated. And then there's the people who will say, well, tengoklah macam mana, I need some more information before I can take it, or pasrah aja lah, I'll take it, no problem. So there's a lot of people on either end of the spectrum, and especially when it comes to COVID-19. Before we had this discussion, a lot of people were already talking about vaccines for other diseases like pneumococcal disease and so forth. So you have this. But the problem right now is, the challenge that we have here is that in the past, mostly we were talking about children, infants, parents are deciding for their kids to get vaccinated. But today, the problem that we will be facing with regards to COVID-19 is really, how do you convince adults to make the decision to get vaccinated? And that's not as easy. And it's a huge challenge that we're going to be able to face. So the Economist Intelligence Unit put out a projection a couple of days ago. This is hot off the press. And they looked at the different countries that may be able to achieve generalized vaccination around more than 60% of the population. And they put together a timeline as to where the different countries will be. And, I'm a little bit jealous of Singapore, really, especially when I started to see those vaccines come off the airplane last month, and now when you look at it, it's projected that they will be able to complete more than 60% of the population by Q4 of this year. And according to the EIU, there may be only 3 countries that are going to be able to do that. And the rest will actually have to wait for 2022 onwards before they're able to vaccinate more than 60% of the population. And if you look at Malaysia, they project that Malaysia is likely to be able to vaccinate more than 60% of the population in Q2 of 2023. And that's together with Bhutan. So let's just keep that on the screen there for a bit. And let's go to this point, which is, we need to take vaccine hesitancy seriously. Whether or not this is successful or not in terms of the national immunization program for COVID-19, it will depend on whether or not we address vaccine hesitancy. So if we fail, it will actually result in, obviously, the inability to achieve the targets and provide the protections for vulnerable populations that we need. And this includes the older population, migrant workers, people who need to benefit from a herd immunity. It will result in resistance to compulsory vaccination. So even if you do make it mandatory for people to get vaccinated, there'll be popular resistance against the vaccine. There'll definitely be a rise in anti-vax sentiments, and this will have a spillover effect beyond COVID-19. So it's not going to be just this vaccine that we're going to see there being challenges. We will actually see in other diseases, for other vaccinations, for other vaccines. And of course, we would not be able to achieve the population immunity of between 60 to 70% within the time frame that we wanted. Now, I just wanted to point out that the Prime Minister this afternoon in his speech highlighted an ambitious timetable for when Malaysia wants to be able to achieve this. And this is what he said, basically, that he's looking forward for the government to vaccinate 27 million people, around 80% of the population, so it's more than 60%, vaccinated in 12 months. Now, when you look at this translates to 2.25 million per month and around 75,000 people vaccinated per day. Now, this is something that is sobering and it's an ambitious target. I sincerely, honestly, I don't think we will be able to reach this target. And if you look at the projections by the EIU there, that's much more of a realistic target, or at least that we're going to be able to achieve, as opposed to this 12-month timetable. I'm certainly hoping that I'm wrong, but definitely when you look at it, this is a very ambitious target. And this will fail if we don't address vaccine hesitancy. So how do we address, building and increasing vaccine confidence? There's three main points, really. I think it's common sense, but basically when you look at it, first one is, of course, building trust. We need to not hide information. We need to be clear in terms of what we're sharing. It has to be complete. It can't be half or impartial. It's partial information. It needs to be accurate about the vaccines. And most importantly, we need to be able to treat people like adults, that we're able to provide information and let them decide and be able to digest and not take a paternalistic approach towards this issue. Because if we do, then we erode trust and we won't be able to build on the necessary relationship that will enable us to make sure that this vaccine program is successful. And we look at building trust in the vaccine, the vaccinators, and the healthcare system. So we're looking at both the public and private healthcare sectors, but also in terms of the community level. The second point is really we need to empower healthcare personnel, and we need to be able to promote confidence amongst them in order for them to get vaccinated. Don't forget, I mentioned just now in my earlier slide that for influenza vaccinations, they among themselves were reluctant to get vaccinated despite being healthcare workers themselves, because they had concerns that were not addressed and therefore resulted in them not getting vaccinated. So we need to be assured that we have senior people amongst the healthcare professionals who are able to project the confidence in getting vaccinated and to recommend vaccination. And remember that healthcare workers have a multiplier effect in ensuring that people are able to be confident in the decision to do so. And finally, it is to engage communities and individuals. Very often, healthcare systems look at communities and individuals as passive recipients of decisions that are being made top down, and basically they just receive whatever is being decided. And we need to change this if we're going to be able to achieve the ambitious targets that we have outlined for ourselves. We need to engage, we need to engage communities in a sustainable, equitable, inclusive way. We need to be able to listen to what the challenges are, the concerns are, address them, respond to them. We need to build trust. And most importantly, is to increase the collaboration between the healthcare system and the communities. And this is something of an opportunity, really, for us to be able to look at in terms of rolling out these vaccines. In other countries right now, like in the UK, they've roped in St. John's as the non-profit organizations, the Red Cross, who are training ordinary individuals to be able to act as vaccinators. So it's a situation where the community is vaccinating the community. And we need to look beyond just the healthcare system, or in this case, the public healthcare system, to be doing the work that needs to be done. Remember, we have a target of 75,000 people per day that we need to vaccinate in order for us to be able to achieve that target within a year. So the recommendations that I have, don't worry, this is almost the end of the slide. Yi is really wondering, when am I going to finish? So first of all, we need to make sure that we have and we develop and implement a COVID-19 vaccination communication plan that is inclusive, transparent, and accessible. It needs to be able to be done in such a way that we make use of the different mediums of communication to be able to convince, to be able to build confidence, to build trust, and to ensure that people are able to be reached out as many people as possible so that as many people can be vaccinated in as quick a way as possible. And today we can see this already being done by the Ministry of Health. I'm glad that the government is not waiting for the vaccines to arrive physically on our soil before doing the communications. They're already starting it on social media, on the different mainstream media in Azrul and so forth. So this is good. One of the things that the government doesn't do very well is consultation. I do hope this will improve, because consulting with the public and private, consulting with the private sector and the community stakeholders throughout the vaccine acquisition and deployment process is really key to ensure that we're able to catch problems before they occur, to be able to learn from mistakes, and most importantly, to have a monitoring and evaluation process that continues to persist throughout the deployment, so that we are not going to be confined to something that was decided a few months ago, but continuously changing them and to be adapting them as we deploy the vaccines. Managing expectations is a tricky situation where very often the community, policymakers, and especially politicians need to be aware of what is possible, what is realistic, and most importantly, what can we expect within a certain period of time. Things like the MCO, for example. What do you expect from a 2-week lockdown? It needs to be communicated clearly. It needs to be managed in a way that makes sense. But most importantly, we've got to tell the politicians especially that this is what's doable, this is what's realistic, and most importantly, this is what the science is telling us. We need to follow the science in terms of the decision making with regards to this. And when it comes to listening to the experts, public health professionals need to be part of introducing what can be expected from interventions that are being done, especially when talking about the vaccine rollout. And I mentioned just now about mobilizing the communities, not just as passive recipients of the vaccine, but also as vaccinators, where they themselves can be trained to vaccinate each other and for them to be able to advocate for vaccines. I believe that at the end of the day, support from the community and as well as healthcare workers are going to be keys to success of a rollout of this vaccine. So in conclusion, we have to realize and recognize that vaccine hesitancy is on the rise and it needs to be addressed aggressively. I think the issue right now is that with a lot of questioning and sowing of doubt on vaccines, it will result in a delay in the deployment of these vaccines into the community, which could cause actually people to be left out, people left behind, and most importantly, vulnerable populations that should be protected now, not be protected and perhaps even be harmed. We need to resist. I know a lot of people, a lot of healthcare professionals have actually spoken about this, that we need to do compulsory vaccination to be able to reach herd immunity. But really, we need to resist that because it cannot be seen as a quick solution. At the end of the day, compulsory vaccination could actually cause more harm, raise more doubts. And most importantly, I think when we're looking at the issue of trust and confidence building right now, we need to be able to convince those who are currently hesitant to be vaccinated. And that cannot be done through a compulsory or mandatory approach. And finally, I think this is something that we need to remind ourselves is that when vaccines are deployed, they should not be treated as magic wands or silver bullets. That suddenly the cases are going to be dropping immediately, that there's going to be suddenly a lessening of the restrictions that are being put onto us, and that suddenly the infections will not occur, that it will suddenly die off and the spread of COVID-19 will stop. This is wrong. Vaccines will need time to be able to have an impact on the community. Even when you have already been vaccinated, you have to still be adherent and comply to the SOPs. And when I say this, it's wearing masks, physical distancing, all this, which is currently part of our lives today. So even when people have already been vaccinated, this will be part of our life for many years to come. And at the end of the day, we need to continuously be vigilant. Constant vigilance is necessary when it comes to this disease, and vaccines will be part of this strategy that we're going to need to be able to deploy sooner rather than later. which will work together with the SOPs that we are practicing today. So that's it from me concerning vaccine hesitancy. I open to questions later on during the session. Thank you very much. Yi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Azrul. Indeed, transparency and communication planning are definitely tools to educate about the vaccines. The next panelist I would like to invite is currently the chairman of the PSC for Health, Science and Innovation. It is a bipartisan committee in charge of ensuring the national COVID-19 vaccination strategy is carried out as planned. Please welcome our second panelist, Dr. Kelvin Lee Wuen. Dr. Kelvin, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor and a great opportunity for me to be sharing some of my thoughts with you all. I was really listening to what Saudara Azrul has been sharing. I was hoping that he would actually go longer because he, as always, presented a very good presentation to give a very good overview of the issue of hesitancy and the vaccine itself. I think I'm going to categorize some of my sharing into three main parts. I think the first part, I think the main question that a lot of people ask is, this vaccine has been rushed. It's only 1 year. Is it safe or not? So I'm going to explain or at least share some of the context of this whole vaccine research throughout this whole year. The second part, I'm going to share, of course, why I believe in the context of Malaysia, it is important for us to be vaccinated. And of course, the third part is the role of the Parliamentary Select Committee of Health, Science and Innovation and what we can help in terms of building confidence and also acceptance, not just on the vaccine itself, but also the whole approach towards COVID-19 in our government. So I think on the first category, I think the main question everywhere when I ask, everybody says that, is it safe to take the vaccine? Normally, vaccine research will take 7 to 8 years. This takes about 1 year. Is it safe? Let me give you the context. 7 to 8 years, that period of time which people always mention, does not automatically mean that the vaccine is safer. Because that's in the reality, when we are doing a research for a vaccine or a drug, actually most of the time is used in waiting rather than researching itself. What do I mean? Sometimes the researchers, they have to wait for approvals from committees in their country, which sometimes only sits twice a year. Some of them have to wait for funding. Some of them have to wait for direction from the different companies and different bureaucracy and protocols and stuff like that. So the 7 years does not mean 7 years of full out fledged researching. So, and we know COVID-19, we have an unprecedented support, unprecedented investment into COVID-19, not just by governments, but also by philanthropists and private sectors. There is a big interest in pushing out this vaccine as soon as possible. And that is why there's a lot of focus, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of resources, and there's a lot of help to push this through. And of course, we know that science in 2020 is so much better than it was before. And also this mRNA technology that has been talked about, it is not something new. The fact of the matter, it has been around since the 2000s, and the scientists did not start from zero. The pharma companies as well that did this research, they are highly motivated. Why? Because they are backed by market guarantees. They know the extensiveness of this pandemic. They know that basically every country should be wanting to purchase these vaccines. That is why there is incentives for them to push through. So again, as I said, this is the context that what was before does not necessarily translate to what is now, because the factors, the context is a bit different. So again, I'm going to stress here, the concerns that has been raised by different people are legitimate. It's understandable that some people have certain level of doubts, certain level of question. As Azrul said, it is the responsibility of those in authority or those with scientific background to send the assurance, because we should not force, and I concur with my colleague just now, we should not force the general public to take something without proper information, without transparent information and proper education. But I think we need to manage our certain expectations here. A safe vaccine does not mean that it is completely safe from side effects or adverse events. However, vaccination in general produces an overwhelmingly greater benefits to an individual and society than the risk of such adverse reactions. So it is, to be honest, it's more harmful to one's health to contract COVID-19 rather than to take an approved vaccine for the disease. And when I mention approved, it's approved by, in Malaysia, the NPRA, which I have full confidence in the professionals that's in the NPRA. So you see, although majority of COVID-19 patients in Malaysia experience no mild symptom, I'm one of them. I was one of the early patients in March, and I did not experience much symptoms. But however, the MOH actually note that the percentage of people from moderate to severe stages, which is stage 3 to 5, has increased from 7% to 11%. For this group of patients, the risk of ICU admission, ventilation, and also death is very real. So according to the Institute of Clinical Research, 87% of reported COVID-19 deaths in Malaysia has at least one underlying health condition. And this is based on 335 COVID-19 deaths. And this is a database of November 22nd. So you see, nearly 2/3 of COVID-19 victims were aged 60 and above. The mortality rate for age 70 above is about 9 to 10%, which is actually substantial. So you see, about 61% of COVID-19 fatalities in Malaysia has had one of the NCDs: high blood pressure, diabetes, which is about 41%, heart diseases 24%, high cholesterol 19%. So there's a high prevalence of NCDs diseases in our Malaysian adult population. In general, diabetes in our population we have about 80%, hypertension I think about 30%, high cholesterol is about 38 to 40, and this is based on the National Mobility Survey of 2019. So what does this mean? This actually means that a large number of young and also middle-aged people in Malaysia are at risk of developing severe COVID-19 disease and even potentially dying from it. And this is why, in that context, I believe while there is certain level of doubts, but that is why it's so important to address this, because vaccination, again, I stress this, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a magic wand, but it's important as part of the holistic or the full approach in dealing with this pandemic. So in order to address such hesitancy, and it's very important to address it so that we reach the target population as quick as possible, there is much to be done on top of education, awareness, which has been started by the government, but I believe the government could engage with more even influencers in our society to promote this message. So the whole process, even concerns, misunderstandings of the whole vaccine procurement, the whole national vaccination strategy, the whole immunization program should be addressed with full transparency, with public accountability. And I believe that one of the main platforms this can be done is through not just the PAC in government, but through the Parliamentary Select Committee of Health, Science, Technology and Innovation. So I was recently elected as the chairman of the PSC. It was a high honor, but of course, great responsibility, because during this pandemic, this is, in my view, one of the most important committees, because we have to address two main things. One is the whole government's approach towards COVID itself, and number two is the national vaccination strategy. So again, my main objective, what I believe the main objective for this PSC is, I frame it this way, is to commend and to recommend. So basically, we are there to affirm right practices of the government, and also to give input and add value so that there is better practices moving forward. Such is very important to get public's confidence, acceptance in the approach, especially during the vaccine rollout. And the PSC, I believe, I see it also as a unifying point where we can get all the sectors involved, as mentioned before, the private sectors, the health coalitions, the GPs, which are so important, and hopefully together have a fruitful, constructive discussion. We will compile proper report, get data from the ministry, which they do not release to the public, so that we can make informed decisions and informed discussions, then write a proper report and hopefully compel the government to respond to suggestions such as that. So there are so many stakeholders in this approach. We have always been advocating, experts has always been advocating a whole of society, a whole of government approach. And there are so many strategic partners that have should have been engaged since the beginning. Of course, one of them is the private sector. I'm very happy that the Prime Minister has recently said that they have been engaging with the private sector, including the Association of Private Hospitals of Malaysia, or APHM, to try to engage them and also to get them to help. Today, the Prime Minister even announced 100 million allocations to them because they have agreed to treat both COVID and non-COVID patients. Of course, I have further questions on that, which I intend to explore in a PSC in terms of how would that be spent, whether it's enough, what can be done more to empower the private sector. And one more sector that is very important, not just hospitals, but the GPs that I feel play a very, very important role. Because you see, for me, GPs have two main roles. Number one is actually the two Ds, detection and the distribution, which is the vaccine rollout. Azrul just now mentioned that in the UK, and he was rightly to point out that they involve different communities, even St. John's, even the non-profits. They engage them, they train them to be able to inoculate this. And I believe in the context of Malaysia, all this is needed. And in order to do that, we need to engage our GPs. This is one untapped brain power, one untapped sector that we really need to make full use of. First, on detection, mass detection, and also on a vaccine rollout. However, I have to stress this. In order to have a full unified healthcare network alliance or whole society approach, it does not mean that KKM does not have an important role to play. The fact of the matter is KKM has an even more important role to set up proper unified regulatory system and SOPs, how these different sectors can be involved. When you're involving the GPs, for example, when you do a case detection or you do screening, what if a person gets positive? What is the procedure next? Who transports the patient? Who isolates the patient? Who does the contact tracing? And what is the timeline and what is the expectation or target is like? All this has to be coordinated by the Ministry of Health, including maybe mild patients, stage 1, stage 2, that is under home quarantine order. What are the SOPs? What kind of history are we taking? We have to take histories. We are talking about a home quarantine because we have to determine the suitability of them being home quarantine or not. So all these SOPs, how the private sector should be involved, has to be properly formulated by the Ministry of Health. And once they kind of decentralize the approach and allow the private sector and different stakeholders to be part of this whole approach, it actually gives more breathing space to KKM to actually plan ahead, to better regulate and to better come up with long-term strategies so that they are proactive against the whole approach rather than spending so much time being reactive or firefighting in this. So I think that is very important to engage all stakeholders and even state governments. Because you see, public health itself is not just a federal government matter. Right now, the narrative, it is a very centralized federal government. It is a very top-down kind of procedures. But I believe the state government plays a huge important role in not just detection, but also maybe even doing the vaccine rollout, because they know the local context, they know the local knowledge, they know the demographics, and they may have the required facilities and even assets in order to roll out this vaccine. So I think I'm from Sarawak in Kuching. I think in the context of the national vaccine strategy, one of the big questions I always have is how is the distribution going to be done in the rural areas? How is, in the case of Pfizer, of course, I believe that it will be more concentrated in the urban areas, but even other vaccines, there will be certain cold chains that has to be maintained. So how are they going to maintain the cold chain, especially when it comes to transportation to the rural areas? And in most, the current pool of vaccines that we're getting is a double dose. So especially for people in the rural areas, how do you increase compliance for them coming back to come for the second dose? Because we're looking at 3 weeks after. For them to travel to the nearest clinic takes hours, sometimes in the rural areas. So you expect them to go back and come back again 3 weeks after that. There has to be some mechanism, there has to be some procedures in place to monitor and to promote compliance between this cohort or this people group, this vulnerable people group. So currently in Sarawak, we are experiencing one of our highest surge, and it's a public health nightmare, I would term it, because it has reached to the rural areas, it has reached to longhouses. So that is one of the biggest concern that we have, and I hope that the government has proactive plans to address this issue. So I think we need to be proactive. You see, if we look at the context of the UK and the US, they are struggling with various challenges in administering the vaccines which they already received. So I believe that we may occur such similar obstacles as well. So we need to learn from our neighbors, we need to learn from different countries and be proactive when we eventually roll out when the vaccine comes in February. So the planning starts now, the preparation starts now. The moment vaccine arrives in KLIA, we need to be ready. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelvin. Next, I would like to invite our third panelist. He is now the leader of the Selangor Task Force for COVID-19. It is a committee that ensures the operations of health facilities in Selangor from being overwhelmed. Please welcome Dr. Seri, Dr. Dzulkefly. Dr. Dzulkefly. Dr. Dzulkefly, you can go ahead.
Right. Okay. Yes, sorry, had a technical glitch there. Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Yeah. And how about my video?
Video is a little glitchy, but
Yeah, I'm having problem here. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that it suddenly has developed that way. Okay. I just will proceed. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for having me here together with friends that have spoken earlier, and I'm so privileged to have two presenters presenting all the slides, which perhaps I have also more or less the kind of same slide that they have presented. But I think I would not bore you with to repeat what they have said earlier, but would just by way of introduction make a mention of how actually vaccine represent some of the most impactful health advances seen to date, by way of particularly by way of this COVID vaccine, which seemingly and surely is the fastest vaccine in human history. So that would be a big applause for medicine and human civilization, that is apparently we're all on our knees for almost a year, and all we could do was to lock down and then lock down again and then lock down again, and there we are in our third wave, being locked down in a few states, and that's how until hopefully end of February and early March, first quarter, that we'll get to execute and roll out our vaccine, program. And I must say, and I don't think I need to convince all of you that vaccines, as I said earlier, present a huge public health success story, and particularly of infectious disease that has almost been wiped out, like smallpox, like the measles that are saved 99% of cases everywhere in the world, and polio, and many other infectious diseases that were once upon a time, were the scourge, of humanity. So I think without much ado, I'm sure you are more than convinced that despite whoever are skeptical, those groups that are, and mind you, some of them are also medical doctors who are still part of the global anti-vax movement, be that as it may, but there is no doubt of the fact that vaccine, present itself as a huge public health success story. So going straight into what I would want to say immediately would be to address how come this particular COVID-19 vaccine is coming so fast. And because of that, does it compromise, safety and as well, particularly safety, and perhaps as well, some would argue on efficacy. But surely that would have to come to be addressed on a longer term. They say perhaps it is not now that we see acute effect or adverse effect, what is known as the AFI or the after effect following immunization, AEFI, but then you will come later. Yeah. So all these are issues that I thought would be pertinent to address. Could I have at all my slides? Is there any chance for my slide to be shown? Perhaps it's more or less a repeat of others, but I would want to have it because I've been given certain tasking of introducing vaccination, so I wanted to just is there any chance for it to be shown?
Dr. Su, we have not received your slides actually.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Send that. Okay.
Will you be able to open the slide from your side, because I've not been sent any slides? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Perhaps, Owen, can I just verbally?
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. Because I think I will not take so much time. I will just quickly go through with this, and then we can open for discussion. All right. I have said that certainly the first thing that comes to mind is on safety, because why is this vaccine, opposed from all others, particularly those that are traditionally manufactured or produced, taking more than 7-10 over years. Yeah, perhaps as well. Most recently, the mum vaccine took 4 years. And even the most recent vaccine for Ebola took 5.5 years, right? Now, I would want to address that first before I go into anything on my slide, by quickly saying that I think Dr. Kelvin as well has addressed this earlier, but I must say, to reinforce further, people really want to know, did we undermine the safety of vaccine because it was done so fast and without long-term studies? Of course, long-term studies would have to come subsequently, because you are only into the first year over of this COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, the issue about a long-term kind of safety, in terms of fertility, generational studies, even before clinical or preclinical in animal studies would have to take time. But then of course you must understand, if I go quickly on the phases of a clinical trial after the preclinical trial in animals, phase 1, 2, 3, and of course the longer term, the phase 4 is what is known as pharmacovigilance. You have to follow through. After the usage, the use of vaccine, or for that matter any other drugs, they've got to be followed through. So long term would certainly have taken time. But let me say this to give you this comfort. Yeah. Going by history of all vaccinology, and the expert will there say that longer term effects even longer term effects, if at all it is going to be appearing later, would occur overwhelmingly, in the majority of the 90% of those that that has been vaccinated, would occur between the 30 to 45 days after the vaccine trial ends. This is something of a matter of fact and observation, by experts. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci was also saying this, that and that is actually what underscores, or that is the underpinning reason why the FDA, is giving this the what is known as the EUA, or the Emergency Use Authorization, because based on this premise, on this science, that that any longer term effects that occurs after use would appear, in fact, from their experience, between 30 and 45 days after the vaccine trials end, right? And if you have to wait 60 days from the time 50% of the people of the trial got their last dose. So that is why the FDA, as in fact given this EUA, yeah. So if you wait 60 days, you already wait for 60 days to see the long-term effect occurring, and for that matter, you wouldn't expect something that you even say in the year 1982, that the longer term effect was going to come in 1986. That is not what is really meant in this, yeah. So this is why, although it is correct to say of a longer term chronic effect or whatever, particularly on fertility and whatnot, but actually this is what the observation of the experts, particularly on the vaccinologists, opinion. So if I come back to that, if I come back earlier to this particular, why are we saying that they are not cutting corners, is because, among other things, we will talk and discuss over this later. But even you see, they have not compromised. For example, the Moderna trial, in fact, were among participants were 30,000 people. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and yeah, that's right. And the Pfizer to the tune of 44,000 people. Yeah, and certainly these are huge numbers. And be that as it may, you have seen adverse effect and even death or whatnot that has been such a controversy. But when you get to the detail of the peer-reviewed clinical, papers that are either published in New England Journal or the Lancet or other peer-reviewed publication, then you come to realize that yes, they may trigger a very emotive reaction, but then as you come to realize that that these deaths or are in fact amongst the placebo group, yeah, more than even the treated group. And of course, I don't have to go into detail of this, that there were underlying diseases, of those that finally died. They could be explained, and statistically it's non-significant. So this is what we have got to, we cannot quickly jump into the bandwagon of accusing like the anti-vaxxers of all these adverse effects essentially due to the vaccine. But we must very objectively look at the scientific papers, particularly the peer-reviewed one, to understand what actually is the etiology or the causation or the cause of all this. Yeah. So I've just got to say that, and particularly over anaphylaxis reaction in some, yeah, and these are also have been discussed and debated at length. So yes, I think more. If I just could carry on to say to you that you could actually very briefly for the for those that have no exposure of science or whatever, there are these phases of clinical trial. You go into, after the preclinical trial in animal studies, then you go into phase 1. Yeah, phase 1 and phase 2 essentially is to establish, particularly over safety and as well on dosaging or the dose. Yeah, and this way they go for dose response, whatever the parameter that they're looking at, and then to identify as early as possible over side effects. Yeah, and even in phase 2 they would be doing the same. To get to identify these smaller. You can't subject 30,000 of people to this, but these are the smaller group of participants that you get to expose them or treat them or administer all this vaccine at that early stage. Administer them and then observe them, and then if I may say that usually about 75% of the candidate drugs or vaccine will drop out after first phase 1 rather, and then subsequently as well, you'll get to see that in phase 2 there are also dropout of about 33% of drugs or vaccine get drop out in phase 2, where it is essentially again to intensify the testing of efficacy or effectiveness and to further validate and evaluate safety. And if approximately 30% of drugs or the vaccine, move to the next stage, well, a third of it moves to the next stage of phase 3, and that is what the phase 3 to confirm effectiveness. They will do these double-blind studies, randomized, so they will have to confirm effectiveness and to further look into the side effect, minor side effect, and compare placebo to treatment group and collect and collate the data, the clinical data and whatnot. So there you are. You then when it's finally, as I said earlier about phase 4, and that's where you get to monitor post clinical use over what is known as pharmacovigilance. Yeah, to be vigilant over whatever effect or adverse effect that you see after use. So if I may just quickly echo friends earlier, but I don't think I need to go into that, particularly over the platform for SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. Okay, the virus is SARS-CoV-2, yeah, a vaccine. So you have four essentially category of using inactivated or attenuated weakened virus, then this viral vectors, okay, using viral vectors, as we have mentioned earlier, on the example that was given earlier. And then, of course, the nucleic acid, particularly now we're talking about the messenger RNA, and this is to do with Pfizer. Oh my God, I keep losing this. And then, of course, the one that is using the protein base, which is essentially protein subunit as the antigen, raising the antibodies. So I wouldn't want to go into greater detail, but I'll, if I may, just go a bit more detail, a bit more granular on the phase 3 trial result of Pfizer. Yeah, but if I may just say this, that the FDA has set the bar of efficacy to be higher than 50%, and we have been reported of Sinovac to be slightly over 50%. That 50% is almost like a cut-off point where below it's considered that you have failed the test of efficacy. Yeah. Quickly, phase 3 trial of Pfizer, where I said earlier about 43,000 participants. That has, they have now almost like determined that the efficacy in preventing symptomatic COVID-19. Yeah. After day 7 of the second dose is almost like 95%. Yeah. And here I can go into great length at this, but then I would just say that whether what is in question is about durability or the duration of protection of this Pfizer vaccine, that is still in question, and as well whether it is able to stop transmission. It is of course able to address the disease per se, but this is the question in point of most of, or in fact all of the vaccine, whether it can produce like the influenza vaccine that you can actually you can actually stop transmission. That is the mood. That is a point in contention of all these vaccine, because it's not proven as yet. Yeah? So the adverse effect, I wouldn't want to highlight any that you any particular thing except the anaphylaxis in the UK, 2 cases of but mind you, anaphylaxis 2 cases. FDA reported it is 11 per 1 million anaphylaxis, which is admittedly arguably high. Yeah, that is the contention. But again, I said earlier, it has to be looked in every case. It's particular idiosyncratic or whatever you call it, as a particular response or person that has got a particular, predisposing health condition. Yeah, so individual with it is contraindicated in people like individuals with histories of severe allergies, to other vaccines. Those are the contraindication of such person or patient. Yeah, the Moderna again using mRNA also is in the phase 3 clinical trial result involving 33,000 participants, finding coming with 94% efficacy in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 diseases after 2 weeks, yeah, after the second dose. Yeah, and this is confirmed in 196 confirmed COVID cases. Yeah, and there were 30 severe cases, all found, again, I've said earlier, in placebo group, so no major safety concerns were reported. All right, I would quickly now, rather than going into any more detail on things that may bore you, perhaps we can discuss if really we want to go into any particular discussion on adverse side effect or whatnot. But I would now quickly turn on to something of my role in Selangor, leading or chairing the Selangor Task Force COVID-19. In relation to what we are discussing tonight, we were able to schedule or persuade the Chief Minister of Selangor to, in fact, procure, and we are, without going into any great detail, you're talking to few manufacturers of vaccine, very well, the few candidates that are already gotten the NPRA, submitted the dossier and already got them registered in Malaysia. We are talking to to them, and hopefully to others candidate vaccine that are in the process of getting registration by the NPRA. What we have convinced Menteri Besar to do is within the provision and within the power that whatever little power that there are in the concurrent list of the role of state government in enhancing and healthcare within the particular state in this federation, you come to know perhaps that only Sarawak and Selangor have expressed interest in procuring vaccine. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go into detail, but what is most important when Selangor is doing it, we premise our endeavor not so much of trying to compete with MOH or whatever, but more importantly, over and above what MOH is going to vaccinate the frontliners, the more vulnerable, susceptible group of the 65 and over, and especially, those with underlying diseases, whatever. We took this challenge, and in fact, we took this task of ensuring our industries will be protected. And the only way that we can get them from to avoid and evade constant the long arm of the law is to ensure that we have programs for them, and foreign workers form the backbone of our industries, particularly manufacturing and others. And we, we would want to ensure that Selangor, being a contributor of at least 25% of the GDP of the country, wouldn't have to see what we are seeing right now, a 4-digit number for the last a week over. And we know very well why we are like this. No qualms, no qualms to admit that because Selangor is the most urbanized, industrialized, where human interaction, be whatever settings they are, manufacturing, construction, malls, and all, and with almost 7 million inhabitants of Selangorian population, plus of course legally there are 1.6 million foreign workers, perhaps double it when counting the non or rather the illegitimate whatever workers there are. So you are in a state where this infectious disease is a function of not just density, but human interaction, as you very well know, of the 3 C's, the congestion, the confine, and the constant conversation. So we in STFC managed to, and I must say that the Chief Minister, the MB, more than, bought in and willing to ensure that, we will talk to the stakeholders of these industries, so that, if you want to wait for the foreign workers, if at all they were going to come to be immunized, they will be the last in the list, perhaps, if ever they get to see the light of the day to be immunized. So we want to ensure that our industries will be protected and it will not suffer any, whatever kind of lockdowns, is to ensure that we will, communicate and get the buying in of stakeholders, so that perhaps, when we secure the vaccine, we will be doing it at cost, to get industries and stakeholders, employers, to be in this very, serious investment of making sure that their workers are immunized, such that they do not see any more of such. I don't have to mention any company, any setting, and any particular industry that outbreaks. So that is certainly one. But beyond just vaccine, I must say that the STFC proposes a new program called Preventing Outbreak on Ignition Sites, POIS, something that we are now talking to other states and even to Ministry of Health to ensure that, rather than being reactive and what has been said by my panel member earlier, firefighting, reacting to outbreaks and further outbreaks, we are now using data analytics, using AI, identify not the kind of red spot you have seen in all those infographic from MOH, but identifying potential outbreaks, predicting outbreaks before it happens. This is very exciting, and we have gone down on ground zero to be doing mass community screening, and mind you, we have found out that the positivity rate of places that we predict to be, reservoir or as well spill over from big clusters, and using other parameters, over a dozen of other parameters, we subject it to data analytics to understand over pending outbreaks. And true enough, when we get to do this, mostly although that we have predicted goes beyond even 25% positivity rate, from 8 to 25%. The national positivity rate has been, as I've been informed, is about 8. And you know very well that WHO only recommends that, what is meant by positivity rate, if you do 1,000 testing, you shouldn't get more than 50 positive cases, because that is already 5%. Yeah. So if you get 100 cases, positive cases in a 1,000 samples or those being tested or screened, that is already hugely above 5%, or that is 10%. So what is required is more tests need to be done until you get to lower the positivity rate to just slightly below 5, meaning this kind of community spread or the virus that are always under our bed. We need to look at it, to look down at it. So, because you can suddenly wake up, so that's to put it in a analogous, in a descriptive way of that virus that are now in the community. So the mantra of test, is just not like, as of course you got to do as randomized as possible. If you do it targeted, of course you'll get more higher positivity rate. But what is most important for us before the coming of vaccine, before beyond just clusters, big clusters outbreak, is to look at the sporadic unlinked cases. That is the proxy indicator of the spread of this virus in the community. So I think with that, as an additional point to vaccine and beyond vaccine, the non-pharmaceutical public intervention tools and measures that we could undertake, even after vaccine, as I've said by one of my colleagues earlier, there shouldn't be letting down of the guard, because we have got to continue to observe, those, the 3 W's, to wear masks, to, whatever that, wash hand sanitizers, and to be warned, the 3rd W of to be always warned and reprimanded over the carelessness or whatever, the non-observation and non-compliance of behaviors. So in a nutshell, coming from the perspective of STFC in Selangor, yes, we are certainly going to be, leveraging on vaccine to ensure that finally we see the end of this pandemic in Selangor. But even as said by one of my colleagues earlier, it will take a full 1 year, perhaps, at least 2 or 3 quarters before you get to achieve this herd immunity. And herd immunity, if you're talking about Sinovac, the efficacy is, it's only 50%, but perhaps herd immunity by Johnson & Johnson is only 1 dose. And going by pricing, if I may just quickly go on the pricing, of course, there's another round of discussion, but you get to see the AstraZeneca being the cheapest, perhaps. The fact that it is in the COVAX program, it's only costing us $4 per dose, or $8 per 2 doses. So that is about the cheapest. And the 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson is $10 per dose. And we are also, we may not be going for Sputnik, the Russian vaccine, but the Pfizer is actually selling not on the platform of COVAX, as I was told. So it's $40 per 2 doses. So it's rather quite high as compared to, of course, AstraZeneca and that vaccine AZD1222 is still, the most attractive, it looks like. So I think I have almost more or less briefly went through as much as I could, earlier on in the beginning, introducing to you the miraculous and magnificent role of vaccine to end preventable diseases. But I later on, went to some of the aspect of the clinical trials and its the bone of contention of side effects and whatnot that will have got to go into the stage 4 or the pharmacovigilance aspect of continuing to see the adverse effect. And finally, I've tried to cover the role of STFC in getting Chief Minister and the State Health Councillor to buy in over the preparedness of protecting our industries in Selangor. So with that, I thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Datuk Seri, Dr. Dzulkefly. For the last part of this webinar, I would like to invite all panelists for a Q&A session. Before we begin, I would like to invite our dear viewers to consider donating to us at the KLSCAH. Your support will allow us to continue bringing you meaningful webinars like this. So now I will go into the first question of the webinar from our viewers. How to define the efficiency and safety of selected vaccines by Malaysian government? After seeing a few death cases due to injections of the vaccines. For this question, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kelvin. Dr. Kelvin, if you could answer this question for us.
Thank you so much. I think that is a very important question because we received the news that I think there was 29 deaths, if I'm not mistaken, in Norway. But again, we have to put it in perspective. I think this case's death is a majority, if not all, the elderly population with severe underlying diseases. So again, let's look in context. I think in Norway, about 400 elderly patients die on a weekly basis. So is it directly linked to the vaccine? I'm not saying it's not, but again, it is certain questions there. But I think in the context of Malaysia, while we are concerned about such news, but we must trust our own NPRA, or the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency. Today itself, I think the Ministry of Health responded to that report that said that NPRA has taken note on that matter and they will look at it on a holistic way. And I trust the professionalism and the speciality of our NPRA. Again, if we look at the case in the UK as well, there were certain issues of anaphylactic shocks. But again, from my understanding, there is no death. Okay, I may be mistaken in the UK, but in just anaphylactic shocks, they are safe, they are managed. Again, out of, if I'm not mistaken, it's 19, and 17 of them had a history of allergic reactions. So again, in the case of Norway, that is why the regulatory put like a disclaimer that we have is an advisory against for elderly patients with underlying conditions. But again, as I said in my presentation just now, a safe vaccine does not mean that there is no adverse effects. We need to set that as our expectations. But with that said, COVID-19 itself is dangerous. The vaccine probably is not as dangerous, but I trust the NPRA to make that judgment, and they will receive the dossier or the information and make the reasonable decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelvin. The next question we have: should foreign workers be given funding aid for COVID-19 vaccines? For this question, I would like to invite Azrul to answer. Azrul, over to you.
Thank you. Well, this is a very unpopular question, and the answer is also unpopular. I think, in my opinion at least, this is that foreign workers, migrant workers, are a vulnerable group. I think we've seen over the past couple of months the spikes in the number of cases. What happens when you do not protect this population? And it is because of the conditions in which they live and work. which is very often in close proximity to each other, but also in terms of living conditions being crammed, in which physical distancing is just a wish, and basically you are looking at a population that the moment this virus goes into, it will very much spread and continue to spread, and it will basically be self-sustaining. And that's what we've seen. We've seen more and more factories. I think the ones in Klang, once they got it under control in one particular factory, another factory also has another community of migrant workers where it is spreading in that population. So this question, the answer is absolutely, because we need to be able to deal with the spread of COVID-19 within the Malaysian population. And migrant workers are part of the Malaysian population. Don't forget, that basically the disease does not pick whether or not you are Malaysian Malaysian IC, or you have a foreign passport. It doesn't care. It's not going to ask whether or not you buy a cukai tak. It doesn't. So in this case, from a public health perspective, we need to protect them. And here's the good thing. If you protect this particular population quick, you're able to show results also quicker than the general population. So I would say that amongst the priority of communities that need to be vaccinated, I would argue that it should be the migrant worker population. And we should not be stingy about it. This is a situation of we are not protected if we are not all protected. Thank you, Yi.
Thank you, Azrul. For the next question, once we have reached herd immunity through mass vaccination, do we still need to adhere to SOPs, such as wearing masks and social distancing? For this question, I would like to give it to Dr. Dzulkefly to answer. Dr. Dzulkefly?
All right. Can you hear me? Right. Yeah. Okay. I've somehow touched that towards the end of my deliberation earlier, and I've said that in a lot of ways this would be the new normal that we have to observe until such time when we could totally pronounce and announce that we are mask free and COVID free in Malaysia, like what New Zealand has just done, or perhaps as well Australia. So do not at all let our guard down, because until and unless we achieve that herd immunity, which is easily to the tune of getting 75% of our population or 80% of population, but some argue only about 60, immunized. And and I must say that this would be the way that we would have to we've got to coexist with this virus around. We got to live with them until we get to immunize ourselves and get rid of them. I mean, we will not be able to get rid of them, mind you, Yi. There is this also projection that it will occur and it will be coming back as an endemic kind of disease from time to time, periodically, just like the common flu and whatnot. Yeah. So of course, I'm not saying that we're going to be wearing a face mask to that extent, to that stage, but at least for a good 1 year, I think that will be the kind of next normal or new normal that we have got to observe here. And I agree with Dr. Kelvin earlier on his response on that Norwegian Institute of Health report. I was also, asked in a tweet what would be my comment, and I was waiting for this. And actually, what is important is to understand the baseline of deaths in that age group. And Dr. Kelvin just said it was about 40, right? And that numbers is well below that 40. So it is within that baseline. It's nothing. You can argue that it's arguably right to say that it's not attributed to the vaccine. Thank you. And of course, Azrul's answers really reinforce the state of Selangor and STFC's belief that we must take it as our responsibilities to immunize our foreign workers, because they are such an asset in that sense of the word. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dzulkefly. Next question we have is, will we need to get injected every year? It seems like the antibodies in the vaccines can only tahan for a year. For this question, I would like to open to the whole panel. Let's.
I'll start it and then we shall see. I think it's very important to make this point. Even though the pharmaceutical companies have already released a vaccine that's been approved, it does not mean that the studies have ended.
Yeah.
They're still monitoring data, especially how long this antibody or the titer of antibodies will last. So to be honest, we do not know for sure. I don't think we are aware of the dossier provided by the different pharmaceutical companies that actually provide such data. I don't think they have such data because they don't have 6 months to monitor within their trials or 1 year to their trials. But I think, since the research is ongoing, we will need to take daily updates on that itself. Of course, the general underlying understanding is it should last from 6 months to a year. Yeah. Another question that we need to ask, and I'm actually curious to get the answer, is whether each and every person that was inoculated will induce natural immunity or not. So that is another question we want to know, and I think it depends on NPRA to see also those data and make the right decision. Yeah.
Right, Azrul, for you to comment on that, or shall I?
Dr. Sri, go ahead.
Okay,
I'll follow.
All right, I'll just echo Dr. Kevin's answers. Perhaps that would really, that is the durability contention of whether it will last. Yeah, and going by the number that were reinfected, if I'm not mistaken, there were 30 odds of them. Azrul, I'm not quite sure now. Over millions that had been infected. So you get to see that perhaps even natural immunity, or rather by way of getting infected and then develop the antibodies, there's really overwhelming evidence that the immunity, the immune memory of the immune system is good enough, because those are 0.000 whatever percent, 1% of those that have been infected and yet reinfected. And mind you, it could very well be a mutant strain, that will not be recognized by the antibody that they have developed. So, but of course, there are also the T cells, the T killer cell that would always be there to protect the body as well, beside the antibodies. So, the IG, the IgG, and whatever other. So, I think more pertinent question that you perhaps you would want to ask us is whether this vaccine is going to protect over the variants, like quoted by Azrul earlier on B117, the British variant, and as well the South African one. Yeah, that's also another point of contention. Thank you.
If I may just add on to what's been mentioned by my two colleagues just now, is that the purpose of a vaccine is really to help the body build protective immunity, and it does so by stimulating a number of immune cell components, and this includes the T and B cell responses. So when you look at what is in the human body, a vaccine, what we want to be able to see is excitement or a response from the T cell mediated immunity. So the cellular immunity is what you want to aim for, and that it enables to build upon the memory, which Datuk Sri just mentioned just now, and Kelvin, in order for us to be able to then respond to a future presentation of the virus. So your body remembers this alien in your body and responds energetically to defend against it. Now, the thing is that because of some of the complexities of this type of virus, you might end up having to produce new vaccines in the future that respond to different variants. It's the same thing for the flu vaccine, where every year there's a new flu vaccine to respond to a different type or strain of the flu virus which has emerged. So as rightly pointed out just now, we don't have enough time to be able to see how much of the protective immunity that's granted by these vaccines yet. But what has been very clear is also that just because you got infected with COVID doesn't mean that you're immune from COVID. Because it seems that if you are with mild COVID, there's not enough neutralizing antibodies in you, for it to protect you from future infection. So a person who's had COVID in the past, but mild, may get infected again in the future. So a person who's had COVID, mild COVID, would probably need to still be vaccinated regardless of the fact that that person had COVID. So, it's fascinating area of immunology. I'm glad I took classes in it, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that we're learning from COVID that's going to inform on how we develop vaccines in the future. But this is one of the challenges. So we can't be complacent and thinking we already got vaccinated, then tak payah buat already lah. We may just have to do this like a yearly or twice a year, whatever.
Kind of a booster, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's why the SOP compliance after vaccination is so important.
Yes, true, very true, the Kelvin. Yeah. All right, you.
Thank you all panelists.
Okay.
The next question I have is more scientific one. Which kind of vaccine is safer, those with mRNA or inactivated vaccines? For this question, I would like to pass it on to Dr. Dzulkefly.
No, get Dr. Kelvin to answer. He's a medical doctor. I'm a medical scientist. Get him to answer first.
The fact of the matter is, I don't think any one of us can answer this question. Because again, we are not supplied with the dossier. Dossier basically the data or the information by the pharmaceutical companies. But our trust is in our NPRA. So we trust NPRA approved vaccine only. And I think something that is, I think the public must be aware, because I think even this year, there will be some companies, some agents, some media people that will try to sell or publicize or to advertise vaccines per se. My advice, always get it from official sources. Always make sure they are only approved by NPRA and do not believe what you see on Facebook or other social media websites.
Right.
Can I have a shot at that?
Yeah, I can also later on. Yeah, carry on, Azrul.
So I'm not certifying. I'm just basically based on the literature. Disclaimer there. Essentially, when you look at the technology, the mRNA vaccine using mRNA as vaccines is entirely new process. The technology is new in using mRNA for vaccines. The mRNA technology itself is not new. We've used it for the treatment of cancers, a few immunodeficiency diseases, and so forth. So that part is fairly well understood. But this mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines, which use mRNA technology as a vaccine, is going to be the first in the world ever to use it. So we're going to be learning quite a bit, because if this succeeds, we can use it for a lot of other diseases in the future. So the question here is in comparison to inactivated vaccines. So inactivated vaccines have been around for years. It's very mature technology. It's very well understood. And this is what you have in the China-made vaccines, where they're using inactivated virus in order for them to develop their vaccine. So it's a comparison between muka baru dengan muka yang sudah lama. So which one you want to be confident with, it depends on which person that you speak lah. So a lot of scientists put their faith in the tried and tested, and they go with the inactivated vaccines. And a lot of the new cutting edge ones, they're not that sure about. But the mRNA vaccine really is using just a component of the code of the genetic code of the SARS-CoV-2, just a bit, which codes for a component of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
So when it goes into the body and goes into the cytoplasm of the cell, into the human body, it produces that component. So dia jadi macam kilang kecil lah, it just produces that spike protein, and it produces in large quantities, so that part of the virus is recognized by our body. It doesn't produce the whole virus, it just produces that small component, that spike protein. It cannot cause COVID-19.
Yeah.
It doesn't go into the host DNA either. It just stays in the cytoplasm. So at the end of the day, you can say that mRNA vaccines, if we do it right, is going to be one of the most safest according to the science, but we've got to get it right. Inactivated vaccines, there have been problems in the past where you don't do it right, you end up infecting the person with the very disease that they're supposed to be protected from.
Yeah.
But when you do it right, again, this is mature, tried and tested technology, it is one of the most well understood, in a way, cost-effective methods to actually develop vaccines as well. So there's pros and cons here, and it really depends on the amount of time that we are going to be able to have to understand where the mRNA vaccine is going. So I think we can really answer these questions maybe like a year from now, after we've seen the data, the science is proven, and it looks promising right now. I mean, think about the number of deaths and adverse reactions out of the, more than 7 million people who have already been vaccinated. That's quite impressive,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just my shot at trying to answer that question. Thank you.
Right. Okay. I don't think I would want to add any more, but as Azrul said earlier, it will be at least 1 or 2 years down the road that we will get to see this, more in the sense of what exactly, or perhaps I would dare say that which particular type of this vaccine would be more amenable, and as well, in other words, as well contraindicated in some, immunocompromised kind of, patient and persons, that would be particularly over the attenuated or inactivated virus, as opposed perhaps it would be more amenable for this new technology of mRNA, that would be more amenable for them. And at least now you have clear-cut choice. And I think, time will tell how this will, how it will reflect, how it will come out, hopefully, this is a real, is historic, in the sense of the invention of this particular technology, or this creativity in science is very exciting, in fact. And indeed, back to you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Dzulkefly. So we have 2 more questions. Second final question is, what types of diseases are not suitable to have vaccination? Can chronic kidney disease patients be vaccinated? For this question, I would like Dr. Kelvin to answer.
Thank you so much. You seem to be throwing all these questions for me to answer. Again, it's very difficult. We have to base it on the data and what is released by the pharmaceutical companies. What we know now is because they did not test it on children, so children are not advised at this period of time to be vaccinated. If I'm not mistaken, they have also not tested on pregnant women. So pregnant women are not advised to be vaccinated. I think in other cases, even with severe underlying diseases, I think that is the main pool that they are targeting, because these are the most high-risk population. So, of course, again, as I said, a safe vaccine is not without its adverse reaction. But I think the decisions or the strategy that the government comes up, eventually this high-risk protection group, especially those with underlying disease, NCDs, and they should be protected and should receive the vaccine first, in my personal view, and not so much the politicians. Politicians is for, this is my personal stand. Politicians should take it to build confidence, but be given special treatment. The fact of the matter is, I should be considered within my class. It means my age group and my health risk, not just because I'm an MP. They should have been double standards. That's just my view. The people that need it, the frontliners and the high risk population should get it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
No, Azrul?
Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd take a swing at that, Yi. One of the things that's been, that's a really important question, really, because a lot of people have been asking, that who can or cannot take the vaccine. And I think Dr. Kelvin has already mentioned a few of those. But one of the categories of people who, it could be still an open question whether or not it will be benefit as opposed to harm, is people who are immunocompromised.
Yeah.
And people who are living with lupus, for example, with SLE and so forth. Yeah, and these need to be really answered. There's not enough clinical trial data on that, and it's something that still needs to be fully understood as to what kind of effect it could have. So for the moment, my understanding is the advisory is that they are not vaccinated initially, so they'll be left out of that. But they are still looking at the data to see whether the advisory can change. So these advisories change. If you notice, once a month, you see they start changing it to reflect better understanding. And one of the things that the question that was asked, can patients with chronic kidney disease be vaccinated? And the advisory on that is very clear, is that they are actually one of the vulnerable populations that need to be vaccinated. Because if you look at the mortality, you look at Malaysian data, never mind American data or UK data, look at Malaysian mortality data. There's so many people who were infected with COVID, developed severe disease complications and were forced to be in critical care and later died. And you find that they have comorbidities which include chronic kidney disease. So there is an increased vulnerability if you have CKD. So the advisory right now is that they should be among the ones who are prioritized to receive the vaccine once it becomes available. So I'm hoping that when the government decides to announce the national program for immunization of COVID-19, that they will be included in the priority list.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I concur with Azrul's opinion on the CKDs, the chronic kidney diseases. Yeah, and I think really we really need to look at it thoroughly, because it would be life-saving for them. Yeah, rather than on the contrary. I think I'll go along with that opinion for the time being. Yeah. Yeah. And particularly about the immunocompromised individuals, those are very very critical to understand the cost-benefit analysis, or rather not cost-benefit, but is the upside and the downside of the risk profile of this kind of immunocompromised individuals. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dzulkefly. So the last question I have for you guys tonight. Since the government promulgates MCO 2.0 and emergency, some politicians are still talking about political seizure of power. If this culture continues, how should we as voters view this matter? Will the country as a democratic country face division or face division? This is a...
All allowed the non-politician to answer. The non-politician should answer. The bipartisan person.
Let's hear Azrul, man. Let's hear from the non-politician.
Not fair, not fair.
Yeah, Azrul, please.
For real. Well, we actually issued a statement on this issue, about having election during, this epidemic, and we totally disagree with the idea, simply because we've learned from the Sabah state elections what that could do, and the sobering conclusion is that Malaysia is unable to organize a large-scale election in a safe and a non-infectious manner. I mean, at the end of the day, even the cost of having these elections already, you just sweat thinking about it, because that money can go to supporting our healthcare workers who are in the front, responding to this epidemic, welfare benefits, helping people who are deprived of jobs because of the MCO, but also struggling businesses and so forth. So all that resources, all the efforts can go to all that. You don't need to have an election or a continued political turmoil. But if you do have a problem, and we put a clause there, if you really have a political question that needs to be answered, put them all in Parliament. There's 222 people plus with all the staff and everything. Duke it out, work it out in the Dewan Rakyat and decide, because Dewan Rakyat is a space that you can control, you can manage. The public health limitations and threats can be understood. And if they get infected, well, it's just 222 people there. They're all politicians, so maybe they get infected. But the point is, but the point is, you don't need to risk the entire country, to decide a political question. So we said, go into Parliament, settle it there. Sorry, Datuk Sri, a little bit mean there, but at the end of the day, at least you can control and manage the risk there. So that's just my dua kupang's worth of thought on that. Thank you very much.
More than dua kupang, of course.
Thank you very much, Azrul. So we're now, as a wrap up for this talk, first off, I would like to thank one of the viewers for our webinar who has donated 50 ringgit for the webinar series. We thank you for the support, and we welcome every viewer who has enjoyed this KLSCAH webinar series so far. And now I would like each panelist to give a short wrap up for this webinar section. First, I would like Azrul to give his conclusion.
Thank you, Yi, and thank you again to the Kuala Lumpur Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall for inviting me on this. Malaysia is coming to a critical moment in its public health emergency when it comes to COVID-19. I think the way we decide on the decisions and how we look at the epidemic today is going to decide how we're going to respond and be able to cope with the epidemic for the next couple of years. At the end of the day, a lot of the things that we're doing today, the so-called SOPs, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Kelvin and Dr. Sri, Dr. Zul just now, we're going to be doing for a couple of years to come, at least until we can vaccinate the majority of our population. And you've heard me share with you just now when we expect it to be likely that we are going to be able to be vaccinating and reach that magic number of more than 60 or 70% of the population. It could be a couple of years from now. Datuk Sri, Dr. Zul will probably be one of the earliest who can receive the vaccination amongst all of us here. Dr. Kelvin probably like a couple of years down the road, maybe, yeah, and Yi probably even later, So at the end of the day, how we decide on how we're going to behave and how we're going to be vigilant when it comes to this disease is going to determine whether or not we're going to be infected or whether we're going to be able to cope. And this is going to be part of our life for years to come. And having said that, though, I'm looking forward to the vaccines being rolled out. I'm very encouraged that we started this year with at least one vaccine that we were able to secure. I mean, I'm sick of being jealous with Singapore, but now we can say we've got one vaccine that we're going to have soon. And I really call for the government to be able to look at that list of people who should be prioritized and don't think politically or what's popular or what's expedient. Think from a public health perspective. Follow the science and the data and do what's necessary to protect vulnerable populations, because that is what's going to matter the most and create the biggest impact. So I do hope that the government will think about that and be able to continue to make its decision based on evidence and the data. Having said that, though, I do hope that the government, civil servants, and politicians especially will set an example for all of us to be able to look at them as role models of complying and adhering to SOPs. Let's not have social media posts of politicians violating, SOPs, but kenduri dekat rumah lah, some meeting here, meeting there, not wearing face masks. I have no problems with Dr. Kelvin or Datuk Sri, Dr. Zul here, because I know them that they will be following SOPs, but there's so many who don't. And every time they do this, it erodes the trust and the confidence that people have on them. And it will translate to issues like the vaccine. So if we want to address a successful vaccine rollout, we need to address the trust deficit that we're currently experiencing. People need to be able to trust in the government to be able to make the right decisions. And that starts with how they're behaving and how they're obeying the same things that they impose on other people. It matters. Trust will determine whether or not the vaccine rollout is going to be successful. So that's from me. Thank you, Yi.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Kelvin, if you could give your own short wrap-up.
I think. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an amazing discussion with my fellow colleagues and you all viewers out there. I think Azrul just put it in a very good point. I think we are in a very important juncture of our history. I think the one thing I hope that the government actually learns is let's learn from our mistakes for the past 9 months and let's not make them again. Let's have a whole of society, whole of government approach. Let's activate the sectors that have not been activated. I am encouraged by the Prime Minister's announcement that they are inviting experts and specialists to form a committee. It's better late than never. One of the reasons why we are jealous of Singapore, they got their vaccines earlier, was because they were proactive. I think since February or March of last year, they formed an 18-panel expert coalition that actually not only drew out their whole national vaccination strategy, but advised the governments in making such decisions. So I hope that moving forward in this year, we learn from our mistakes, we learn from the successes of others. We have a full government approach, and these committees that has been formed, whether it's the one advising the Yang Ketua Agong, the one advising the Prime Minister, it's not just seen as a political stunt to whitewash or to affirm government's position, but actually to take their input with, real input, their constructive input for the better of the country. And with that, public do not see the vaccine as a silver bullet. It's not a magic wand. The time to roll out, even if you're vaccinated, we need to get used to the new normal. We need to make the adaptations that is needed. And we all play a role. You see, we are all frontliners as much as we thank the doctors, the nurses, the police, the bombers, each and every one of us are also frontliners. And we play that important role. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelvin. Dr. Dzulkefly?
Yeah, thanks, Yi, and thanks, KLSCAH, for inviting me to be on this, with my colleague. It's been a great discussion. And I would only have to add, because they have concluded very well, particularly Azrul and as well Dr. Kelvin. Again, I would emphasize that, vaccine is coming its way, but let's get it very clear that it is a silver bullet in so far as it will be complied with to achieve herd immunity. Before that comes, before that stage arrives here in Malaysia, we have still to observe in as much as possible, with our discipline as Malaysian, to not see outbreaks in the next 12 months down the road or even beyond that, because we have been negligent, and callous over observing SOPs. So yes, we do, it's our immense hope that that we will get to see the immunization program, slightly later than our neighbor across the causeway, but we will have it nonetheless. And particularly in Selangor, we hope to, beyond protecting our Malaysian, we must also be responsible to those that are also, that provide us, the workforce, and this will actually determine productivity and as well, our output, economic outputs. So with that, I think I concur with my colleagues of the importance to observe, continue to observe our SOP and that thing called whole of government and whole of society's approach, whatever shortcomings there were before, we must, amend and reform and take this moving forward. For that, particularly over the group of expert, advisory role, to go beyond just MOH. Nothing against MOH, but as Dr. Kelvin mentioned, there are talents, experienced hands, and top-notch clinicians, infectious disease, public health expert, even to rope in data scientists and others, to together, build a better Malaysia, particularly in the light of handling this third wave COVID wave challenge. Again, I thank you, Yi and KLSCAH. Good night.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seri Dzulkefly. So on behalf of the KLSCAH and the Women Committee, I would like to thank again Azrul, Dr. Kelvin, and Dr. Seri, Dr. Dzulkefly for joining us today and easing us with facts about the COVID-19 vaccine. Also, another huge thank you to the Malaysian Insight for partnering with us this evening. I wish everyone a really good night and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.